Joining me now is the Shadow Treasurer Angus Taylor. Thanks for your time. So will you back that energy rebate for everyone?
Well, can I say that energy rebate is necessary because Labor's failed to deliver on its pre-election promise of a $275 reduction. It's now admitting it's failed and it's putting a band-aid on a bullet wound. It should have dealt with the bullet wound, but it hasn't. So we're not going to get in the way of putting a band-aid on it. But what we needed to see in this budget was a wholesale attack on inflation, beating the inflation dragon. And we haven't seen that. Australians have become poorer under Labor. But sadly, Kieran, we've seen a budget that's not going to change that at all. In fact, the government admits that standards of living and real disposable incomes of Australians are not going to get back to where they were before Labor came to power in this term of Parliament.
Is that rebate inflationary?
Well, you ask the economists that, but I got to tell you, the idea that this is somehow going to trick the Reserve Bank into reducing interest rates, come on, it's a con job, and there's much in this. There's much in this budget that's a con job. It's an election budget. It's $4 of spending for every dollar of saving. It's not restraint. It's reckless in much of the spending. I mean, $13.7 billion in handouts for billionaires through production tax credits, Kieran. We're not going to support that one. I mean, that's the kind of recklessness that is absolutely inappropriate.
That's the future made in Australia initiative.
That is the MIA, so-called made in Australia. I mean, the only thing made in Australia under this government is inflation, Kieran.
I want to let's get to that in a moment. Just to wrap up on the rebate, the Treasurer says that households are hurting up and down the income scale, hence that $300 energy rebate is going to everyone. Do you buy that?
You know, a typical Australian family with a mortgage has paid an extra $35,000 in their mortgage payments in the couple of years since Labor came to power. You know, and they're talking about this as a way to solve the cost of living crisis. Now, we're not going to get in the way of that when that's what Labor's put on the table, but they're not dealing with the fundamentals here. And the fundamental here is a collapse in Australian standard of living. We needed to see restoration of that. That was the first test of the budget. And we haven't seen that. And Labor's own figures in the budget tell us that there's not going to be a restoration of Australian standard of living. There's not going to be the restraint we need. There's not going to be the focus on the fundamentals. There's not going to be the focus on more energy supply to drive down prices. And so Labor is left offering band-aids.
On the Future Made in Australia initiative, you basically said straight up you're not going to back it. Just for our viewers, just to clear it up, this initiative that you referred to, it's essentially paying a $2 incentive per kilogram of renewable hydrogen to make that industry commercial or competitive.
Well, it's not just that.
Why shouldn't we compete?
It's actually, well, yeah, Kieran, there's a lot of small business people out there, I'm sure there'll be some watching this program today, who don't get paid by the government every time they produce a unit of whatever it is they're producing. I mean, but we've got billionaires owning these businesses who want to get a subsidy. Come on, that is not the way you make sure you've got a strong manufacturing and resources sector in this country. I worked in those sectors before government. We want to see a strong manufacturing sector. We want to see a strong resources sector in this country, but you've got to focus on the fundamentals. You've got to get back to basics. Drive down the cost of energy. Make sure you're making fast approvals. Get red tape out of the way. These are the basics that ensure that a business, a manufacturing business and a resource business has the incentive to invest and succeed. That hasn't been happening under Labor, so they're left handing out billions. That is 13.7 billion, which is the production tax credits, the subsidy for every unit of production. I mean, honestly, if that's how they think you get manufacturing going, they simply don't understand.
But they'll say that you're going to subsidise the nuclear industry. So this is a battle now, isn't it, between the hydrogen argument and nuclear?
Well, we haven't said we'd subsidise it. I mean, it's got to deliver a return on investment, and production tax credits are not the way to make any industry succeed. I mean, we've seen Labor focus on these sorts of policies in the past, and they don't work. They simply don't work. They won't work this time. We needed to see restraint in this budget. We're seeing recklessness. I mean, 36,000 new public servants, Kieran. I mean, really? Do we need 36,000 Canberra-based public servants to run this country at a time when Australians are struggling to make ends meet? It's absolutely ridiculous. It's reckless. We needed to see restraint. We haven't seen it. There's $4 of spending for every dollar of savings. It's an election budget. It's a highly political budget.
Well, it looks like an election budget. Do you think we will be going to the polls this year?
Well, it's a highly political budget. There's no doubt about it. It's not the budget that's going to solve the problems Australians are facing. It's focused on solving a problem for the government. Frankly, though, it doesn't solve the underlying problem. And that is the collapse in living standards that Australians have seen since Labor came to power.
Are you ready for an election if they do go?
Always ready for election, Kieran. Always ready for an election. But what we will focus on is getting those fundamentals right. Making sure we've got more supply going into our energy markets, making sure that immigration is in line with housing. We've seen immigration rise again in this budget. It's going up again. 1.5 million over 5 years in the budget last year, and then the MyEFO, which was just before Christmas, it goes up to 1.6 million. This time, it goes up to 1.7 million. I mean, where's it going to end up? It just keeps going up.
Do you give them some credit for back-to-back surpluses, the first in nearly 20 years?
Well, you know, what we needed to see was a structural surplus, but we saw a windfall surplus. You know how we know that? Because in 2 years' time, the budget tells us that the deficit will be $43 billion. Spending growing twice as fast as the economy over the next 2 years, driving us deep into the red. And that's because it's a political budget focused on an election. At a time when we're facing raging inflation, we needed the exact opposite.
Angus Taylor, thanks as always.
Good on you, Kieran.